of the 6 writers, 3 of our writers, and again this is pure coincidence, write about family relationships, or dysfunctional families to be absolutely honest, but in very, very different ways. And it's another huge personal pleasure for me to welcome our next author, who's back with her latest novel in English, Back to Back, After Blind Side of the Heart. Again, it's published by Verhulst, and again, it's translated by the one and only Anthea Bell. Now, 5 years ago, we launched Blind Side of the Heart in English at the Goethe Institute in London with no other than Anthea Bell and A.S. Byatt. And of course, the star of the show herself, the author Julia Franck. Welcome, Julia Franck. Now, I've actually just come back from Berlin, and when you're in Germany, you realise what a major star Julia is. You won the German Book Prize, and I think everything changed from that moment, didn't it?
The whole country changed.
Well, actually, the whole country did change, didn't it?
No. Only my life changed a little bit.
Yeah, your life changed quite a lot. But I mean, I suppose if what you do is you do write about Germany, and always.
Well, yeah, as well about Germany as well. Its people, its history sometimes. But it's only my last 3 novels that are more connected to the country and the historical view on it.
And there's obviously, it's obviously important because those are the novels that have been translated into English as well.
Well, this is something about translation, I think. And there's, for German writers, it's always easier to get a Korean translation than an English. And I think it's about our history, of course. The connection to our history always maybe makes book, a novel, or a film, or maybe even, I think it's different about music, but about films and novels, it's always the connection to history that makes it more interesting for other cultures, for other.
And I think that we are always interested in German history for very obvious reasons. And of course, just coming back from Berlin, one of the most interesting things I noticed that there is actually a lot of talk about the anniversary of the First World War. And on previous occasions, I know we're all talking about that now, but it's a very interesting German angle as well. And then there are various anniversaries throughout the whole year. And the other one, of course, which I'm sure you all know, is the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall in November. And this is something which, you know, indirectly, I suppose, is something that you also talk about quite a lot, write about. Now, you were born in the old East.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know whether you still see yourself as an East German, or has that completely gone now?
Well, still there is, of course, a sort of track inside that belongs to the eastern part, as at least all of my child memories, and then especially also the transit to West when I was like 8 years old.
You went to live in the West with your family, with your mother?
Right, and that was almost a year we had to spend in a refugee camp, which was a very special and not typical German experience, because there were only very few people during that time of the Cold War, when the temperature got on its deepest, that were to move, that were allowed to move. And my mother had applied, I think, for 4 years and invented a whole bunch of reasons why to leave the country, and wasn't allowed to work anymore, and all those, you know, those things. And neighbors were spying, family members spying at us. And so in the end, we were to leave and ended up in the free western part of Berlin in a refugee camp with a little wall around, and a lot of things we are not allowed to do, like we weren't allowed to take pictures, we shouldn't talk with our house neighbors, and we shared a flat with a Russian family. So, well, this is not a very typical German experience, but it made me feel like someone who really was involved in the whole historical process of being separated.
Now you write about your own family and your own experiences in the books that we have, in the three that we have in English. Are you happy writing about your own life and your own family to this degree? Because I always think of you as quite a private person, but in fact you've given your story now to millions of people. I mean, your books sell in enormous numbers, and they've been translated into like 30 different languages, more. Are you happy about this?
Well, actually, I always felt like I kept some very, or maybe the most intimate and private things to myself. And I think the last novel that was translated to English as well, that was maybe the only one where you really could point at certain people and say, well, this might have been her mother, her uncle, her grandmother.
This is back to back.
Back to back. And the other novels is dealing more or less about people that are, you know, created for containing those very intimate experiences. So it's not like you could really match a real person with a fictional.
But you do always marry German history with the personal events, very cleverly, very cleverly.
That was the phases of my last three novels. The very first three novels weren't about historical.
Well, we definitely need to get those translated as well, so we can see the broader picture. But let's talk about the latest one in English too, Back to Back. Now, this is set in the 1950s, 1960s, the time of the building of the Berlin Wall. There we are again. And it's focused on the GDR. And it's focused on a woman called Keta, who is a sculptor. And again, as far as I understand, your grandmother was a sculptor as well. So there is a personal connection.
There certainly is a personal connection, and she was a very strong, believing communist as well. A Jewish girl that had to leave Nazi Germany because of the whole discrimination, or according to Hitler's counting, she was half a Jewish girl, but all the discrimination she had to suffer, in my view, somehow might have made her for a very believing communist. And communists are very different in all parts of Europe. At least today, we are I think, or we have very different sort of communism, and the communism in Germany developed pretty differently, and then appeared, at least when I was little, I always remember how I looked at my grandmother and listened to her words and her inspiration and her ideology, and I always thought, something inside is wrong, and I didn't really knew what it might be, but after, or while I was growing up, I realized that all the stories my mother were telling me about her own childhood and youth in the former GDR, and then my grandmother became very old. She died about 4 years ago, so I really was very close to her world and to her words, to her, but I always had a very indifferent relation to her becoming, her believing.
The book is about a mother and her children, and it's set against this backdrop of East Germany, basically. And they live in a country area just outside Berlin, on the edges of Berlin. And the strength of the book is this parallel history, I think, of the family and of Germany itself. And the really difficult thing is this relationship of the mother with the children. It is so unbearable that I don't know whether any of the other people who've read it, a few fellow judge here is nodding as well. It is a very, very painful book to read. Tell us about the mother and the relationship with her children. So Keta has 4 children, but the children we concentrate on are Thomas and Ella.
Yeah. Well, I think I would rather talk about those siblings, Ella and Thomas, who are very dependent on each other and very...
They're very, very close.
Very close,
1
almost
year
like,
between them.
like twins, and they live in a sort of symbiosis and trying to protect each other, and in the same way trying to, well, to grow up and to get out of the world they are caught into, and
they're trapped in this.
Well,
in
they're
this world.
trapped, and not only because of the wall that will be built up and then closed in '61, but because of all the expectation and wishes of in terms of the ideology of the communistic era, but being very much on their own in the same moment. So in human relations, they're very solitude and very, very isolated. And I think that the abusement they suffer is not only the abusement of an outside, but also the absolute dependence they feel to each other, which is the only way to survive. And so I think it's also a book which is maybe a book of a come of age.
It's coming of age,
yeah,
and it's about love too. I mean, it's about a very, very deep
very
love.
different types of love between siblings, parents, children, and a boy and a girl, of course, as well.
And it's very, very beautifully written, and the poetry in this book too is quite extraordinary. There's a lot of poetry because Thomas in the end writes poetry. And again, there's another heart-stopping moment when I realised, you wrote at the back of the book, that this poetry is again written by a family member.
Right. This is the poetry of my uncle, who, as well, like Thomas in the book, didn't really see so many ways for himself to become a man, to become not only a brother and a son, but a man. And his repression really leads to a certain sort of tragedy. Maybe I don't want to tell in advance.
No,
maybe people want to read.
No, but it is quite an extraordinary story. You're going to read a passage for us.
Yeah.
Where are you going to read from?
Well, actually, I just decided to read a passage which is only about Thomas, and has tried to make himself worth enough to become a student. And in former GDR, all the sons and daughters of academics and artists, as well as he is, they needed to work in advance. So they needed to show the society that they are also working class people and not only,
Intellectuals
yes, and son of better bourgeois. So he really needs to show, and it's meant for a few months, that he has to go to a sort of stone mine where stones are.
A quarry. He has
Yes.
that's to show that he can also be a labourer. He's going to work in a quarry.
Right. He went to Gommern on his own. Kete, his mother, had given him a sketch pad and charcoal to take with him, bed linen, a spare pair of trousers, soap. Even from the train he saw the pillars of dark smoke, and soon after that the 2 chimneys from which they were rising came into view. Going south through the woods, he passed the great wandering dune that lay on the Kulk, one of the oldest lakes filling the stone quarries at Gommern. The sandy soil threw up ripples. The hostel, 3 huts, stood on the road to the quarry. Behind it was the manager's house. They slept 4 to a small room, 2 bunk beds, a table and a locker in each. Thomas was sent to a room with the apprentices. There was acrid smell of sweat, alcohol, urine, something gone bad. You got up at 5 in the morning when it was still dark. Work began at 6, gloves were provided. At first sight, the apprentices looked to Thomas rather younger than him. One might have been 17 like Thomas, the other two were more probably 15. Were they apprenticed to learn about stone quarrying? Was that a profession you trained for? The boys made fun of him when he said hello, asking what sort of posh guy he was. No one asked him anything else. Thomas took the free bottom bunk. His bedclothes were too small for the long, scratchy blanket above them, which could have been woven of coarse wool and remains of plant substances. Thomas thought of thistles. He turned to the wall and scribbled words, and on the words on the sketch pad with his well-chewed pencil. Instead of silence, lonely, helpless, pointless, always beginning, always the same. Life, your death, I'm great in the shadows, I'm endless waiting, a small dirty scrap of fear. Your sphinx eyes are fixed for millions of years. Later he closed his eyes, although the neon tube on the ceiling was still lit and the boys were playing cards. They were bowling. The prize on offer was a certain lady from the Wasserburg. The boys raised the stakes. The atmosphere was heated. In spite of the cold, there in their vests sweating. They reminded each other of intimate details of the woman, her big boobs, her behind, but also how much she obviously enjoyed it. She was the prize for whoever had won at the end of the evening, and the others were going to watch. In the morning, Thomas opened his eyes and heard a splashing as if someone had turned on a tap. But no one was washing. The boy with an ear that stuck out and freckles who had been sleeping above him that night